Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Paul Neuberger.
All right, my story starts in 1956 or 55. I'm just out of kindergarten, getting ready for first grade. It's June, and my sister, who's almost 9, and I are going to go to New York City to spend 6 weeks with our grandparents and aunts and uncles. We've driven to the airport, Willow Run at the time, by my father and my mother. We see this airplane, and it reminds me of Aladdin and the magic carpet. That big aluminum can, that shiny thing, is the magic carpet. We get in this airplane, and I've got this window seat, and I'm flying along, and I'm looking out underneath the airplane, and we're flying along, and I see this big patchwork quilt of patterns on the ground, and I go, wow, that's the quilt that I sleep with every night. It's going to keep me warm. I'm safe here. And I'm watching other things that fly underneath me, and I'm just absolutely amazed. We get to New York, and we're escorted off the airplane by the flight attendant, the stewardess, and handed to my grandparents and my Uncle Rudy. My grandmother says, "What did you think of flying?" And I said, "I'm going to fly one of these one day." And my grandmother, in her heavy German accent, said, "Jewish boys don't fly." I'm 5.5 years old. What do I know? We go to my aunt's house, and we're having dinner, and my aunt says to me, how was flying? How was the experience? Since we were the first in our own immediate family or extended family to fly. I said, "One of these days I'm going to fly one of these." She says, "Jewish boys don't fly." I didn't know what they meant. But later in life, I realized that I'm supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer because flying is a dangerous occupation. I was in the Boy Scouts, and one of the Boy Scout leaders owned an airplane, and he took his son, myself, and another boy for an airplane ride. We drove out to Pontiac in this big old 59 Cadillac with the big old taillights on the fins. And got into his 4-seat airplane. Everybody gets a window. And off we go. We take off out of there. We found he wanted to do circles, is what I found out. And we did 3 circles to the left around an intersection, 3 circles to the right, and came back to land. All I knew is I wanted to fly again. In 1972, I got my first full-time job. Now I had the means to fly. So I started to investigate what it was going to cost to get a private pilot's license. Well, I found out it was $13.50 an hour for the airplane and $5 for the instructor. My grand total was under $850, and I got my license. I took my first lesson in April of '73 and got my license the first week in July, 46 hours. And I have, in my logbook, the endorsement that says, "Private pilot, single engine land, has the basic knowledge to fly." And that's what the endorsement actually says in it. The minimum knowledge to fly. That afternoon, I took my mother for her first airplane ride. 2 weeks later, now I've got a whole 54 hours of flying time. I decide to take off with a friend, and we're going to go to Oshkosh, Wisconsin for the Experimental Aircraft Association fly-in. Little did I know, we were going to go to the busiest airport in the world for 1 week. Busier than O'Hare, busier than Hartford, combined in 2 months. Over 200,000 movements in a week. I'm flying out of Pontiac, I get to Muskegon, and then out over the lake I go to Manitowoc and then up into Oshkosh. I'm calling the controller at Oshkosh, and I'm not getting a response. I'm calling again and again and again. And finally, I get a response from the controller. He says, "Do you know the protocol for coming into this airport now?" "No, sir." "I thought I just supposed to call and you're going to give me a clearance." "No, go to the gravel pit in the northwest corner of the field, find the gravel pit, and follow the traffic in. And don't make another sound." As I approach the northwest corner of the field, I see hundreds of flying things, like someone has stirred up a hornet's nest. I'm trying to pick a plane that I'm going to follow in. Yeah, right. We get into Oshkosh, we put the airplane in the camping area, set up camp, and someone walks over to me and they ask where we were from. And I proudly said, "Detroit." He said, "Did you fly around the lake or did you fly over the lake?" "I went over the lake at 3,000 feet, very proudly." He says, "Are you crazy?" 3,000 feet, if that engine quits, you've got 5 minutes before you're in the water. Altitude is your friend. It's very important in flying. In January of '74, a friend of mine decided we're going to go to Lansing to have lunch or dinner with some friends, and then fly home in the evening. The weather forecast was clear. It was supposed to be a beautiful afternoon and a beautiful cloudless night. As we left Lansing, we're halfway back to Pontiac. And all of a sudden, I couldn't see forward, I couldn't see laterally, and I couldn't see down. I flew into a cloud, a place where I shouldn't have been. I wasn't trained to be in a cloud. I was supposed to be able to see where I'm going. I start to panic. I try to turn the plane to the left to try to get myself out. I find out I'm diving. I pull back, and now I'm climbing. And I'm still going to the left. I don't know how long I was really in the cloud. To me, it seemed like forever. It's probably 10 or 15 seconds. I dropped about 700 feet, broke out of the clouds, got on the ground, and the next day, I decided I'm going to take instrument training so that I can fly in the clouds should I ever get caught. I got married. I had a small airplane that I was building. It was in storage. I move into this house in Southfield, and as I'm pushing this airplane into my garage, this little one-seater, this little boy runs by and he goes, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a guy, he's got an airplane in his garage." He comes over, the man comes over, and his name is also Paul, and he introduces himself, and I find out that there's a club of Jewish pilots. Not only boys, but girls. And they meet Saturdays and they fly someplace for these $100 hamburgers. So my friend Greg buys this airplane and he wants to go fly down to Columbus, Ohio to pick up computer parts. So we fly down, and he's going to act as pilot in command going down, and I'm going to fly pilot in command coming back. Uneventful going down. We load up the plane with computer parts and start heading back to Detroit. Just as we get north of Toledo, the controller tells me to resume my own navigation. I called him right back and said, "Negative, I don't want my own navigation. I need immediate vectors to the nearest airport. I'm declaring an emergency." "What's the nature of your emergency?" Very calm voice. "My engine is running extremely rough and I want to go down now. Nearest airport. Toledo Suburban's at your 3 o'clock position, 3 miles. Do you have it in sight?" "No, sir." He says, "Turn due east and stand by." He calls all the other traffic on the frequency and comes back to me about 10 seconds later. "Do you have the airport in sight?" "Yes, sir, I do." I talk to him till we're about 400 to 500 feet off the ground. When I do lose contact with him, I park the airplane when I do get on the ground, and there's a phone call for me. It's the controller at Toledo asking if we made it okay. We made arrangements to leave the airplane there and have someone pick us up with all our computer junk and we'd drive back to Pontiac where our cars were. 5 days later, the plane's fixed and we're going to head back down to Pontiac, or back down to Toledo Suburban and pick up the airplane. I'm again going to fly pilot in command. Greg, I don't think is real thrilled about anything right now. We take off out of Toledo Suburban with a full load of fuel, 40 gallons. It's dark, and we're going to head to Pontiac. About 4 to 5 minutes into the flight, we're about 2,000 feet off the ground. I'm getting ready to decall Detroit to get clearance through the airspace. And all hell breaks loose again in this airplane. It's shaken more violently than it did the day before, the 5 days before. It's shaking so violently, I don't know if we're going to survive. I called Detroit Approach and I said that I wanted vectors to the nearest airport. Toledo Suburban's behind you 6 miles, Monroe Custer's ahead 7. What is your choice? I said, Monroe Custer, sir. And please have the fire trucks and ambulances standing by. I do have 40 gallons of fuel on board. The only time you can have too much fuel is if you're on fire or you think you're gonna be on fire. As we got closer and closer to Monroe Custer, and the power in this engine was declining quite rapidly, I did realize that we were going to make the airport if the engine maintained that it was going to continue to run. It did run, and we got this airplane on the ground. When we hit the ground, I told Greg, shut off the fuel. I shut off the mixture. I shut off the pull the mixture and shut off the electrical and the magnetos. He dumped the flaps, and we ran like hell out of this airplane. We didn't know what was going on. We came back, and they towed this airplane back, and we found out that the engine was totally destroyed. We got a ride back to Pontiac. That was the last time Greg ever flew. I continued to fly. And my oldest daughter one day said to me, Dad, can we go get a $100 hamburger? And I said, sure, we can go get a $100 hamburger. So here's this little 9-year-old little girl, and she wants to get this hamburger. So we take off out of Detroit City, and we go to Cleveland. And she's looking on the menu, and she's looking, and she says, Dad, I don't see any $100 hamburgers. I continued to fly through 2005. I still love it. I still enjoy it. I still go out to Pontiac and fly with the guys every once in a while. But when I really want to just play and be a little boy again, I pull out my iPhone and I have a little RC airplane on here and I play it whenever I want to.
Neuberger, UnChained. First time telling the story. Don't be afraid, y'all.